If you cannot make or don't have the necessary supplies to make miniature potteries, but you still want to get that realistic ceramic effect, this video might be for you. Hi everyone, today I'll show you how I made these miniature canisters or jars with polymer clay. These are part of a bigger project I'm working on right now and which I'll show you in depth over the next months. So let's get started. First, I drew some sketches. The canisters have different finish and different lids, but the containers are all made in the same way, out of white polymer clay and with the use of a round dowel. For some of the lids I have used some real cork. I started off with the plain one with the cork lid. I flattened a layer of white clay with my pasta machine, not too thin, around 1 mm thick. Then, using the grate on my cutting mat, I cut out a strip which is a bit less than 1.5 cm in height. I shape it around the wooden dowel, pressing gently, and then cut out the excess clay with my blade. I use a needle to smooth out the junction where the two ends meet and then trim off the bottom of the canister a little bit. Again, with a needle, I then make an indentation along the top edge using very light pressure. And because the clay doesn't stick to the wooden surface of the dowel, the canister can be rather easily removed. But in case you're afraid of deforming the canister, you can leave it on the dowel, bake everything together, and then remove it afterwards. Here I'm repeating the same process for another canister, but this time I use the back of a pen, which is larger than the wooden dowel, so that in the end I have a mix of different sizes. And after baking, I sand them with my nail file to smooth out the edges and also to clean the surface, which always seems to catch bits of dust and impurities, no matter how often I wash my hands or clean the tile I'm working on. And now time to paint. For a couple of canisters, I chose a sage green shade. I use acrylic paint, and to achieve that look that some ceramics have, where the color is uneven, more intense in some areas and less intense in others, the key is to thin the acrylic paint with water. This means that each canister will be different depending on how the paint will dry out, but that's okay, that's precisely the effect I want to achieve. After it's dry, time to varnish it. The other key element to get a decent ceramic look is a good quality gloss varnish. The one I'm using is by a Belgian brand called Darwy, which I used for years and I think it does its job nicely. So with a small brush, I apply a generous layer of gloss with a slight dabbing movement to avoid ending up with brush strokes on the surface. I let dry for some 10 minutes or so. And this is the result after one layer of varnish. I then apply a second one. The cork lid is made from a real cork, out of which I cut out a thin slice. And very conveniently, the cork size needed for the green canisters was the same of the circles of this paper punch I have at home. So in this case, I didn't have to use my scissors. To paint one of the larger canisters, I first applied a diluted layer of brownish acrylic paint, and I know that here it looks like pink, but that's the artificial lights. And then, using a brush with stiff bristles, I added some dark brown dots. After varnishing it, I make the lid, and this time I don't have a convenient paper punch, so I have to cut it with a pair of scissors. First I trace out the shape using the container itself as a template, and then I cut it out. I did a rather poor job here, and the shape was not exactly round, so I had to adjust it with some sandpaper. For one of the larger canisters, I decided to add writing on it. I tested some fonts and then went for a thin and tall one. I did the lettering after the clay was painted and varnished. This is because I used an alcohol pen and the ink would be dissolved by the gloss varnish. And then again I made a cork lid. For another type of canister, I made a ceramic lid. I rolled out a small ball of clay and flattened it with my fingers, eyeballing the size and checking that it would fit. Then I made a small flat snake of clay, decorated it with a dotting tool, gave it a slight round shape and glued it in place with liquid polymer clay. And lastly, I varnished the lid. Last canister, the one with the airtight lid. The main body is made the same way as the others. For the lid, I used again the round wooden dowel to shape a bit of white clay on top and around it. Trim off the excess clay with my blade. I press the top slightly on the tile I'm working on to have a nice flat surface, and then with a needle I trace the same indentation like the one I did for the other pieces. Bake, paint and varnish just as before, and we're ready to make the metal parts that will join the two pieces together. I cut out a section out of this thin copper wire and wrap it around the jar so that the wire fits into the indentation. Trim off the excess wire and add a dab of glue only where the two ends join. I do the same operation for the lid, but first I shape the wire so that it has a kind of loop, and then I wrap it around the lid. At this point I can glue the lid on top of the jar. To make the clamp, I first shape the wire into a small oval ring, then cut out a tiny strip of aluminum out of this tea light, and then I join these two bits together in this way. I paint the aluminum bit with acrylic paint and then glue the clamp to the canister. And we're done. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye!